Flying Finance is our special guest today on this webinar series on profit improvement. The topic is buying a time machine, grow your business with private aviation. And our CEO here at Strategic Source, Doug Austin, will come on in just a moment for some opening comments. We'll have some poll questions and a post-session survey, and we have a lot of good content. So let's get things underway now, starting with Doug.
Thank you, David. Well, we're really honored today to have Preston Holland at Flying Finance to present on a topic that we haven't presented before. Before we get into that, however, if you're interested in a copy of this deck, please scan this QR code and we'll make sure that we get that off to you right away. A copy of this webinar will be posted on our website probably by tomorrow as well. So go ahead and scan that. We started this series almost 3 years ago now, and our objective was to bring innovative suppliers that we were familiar with that can impact your expense line, that can impact audit and recovery opportunities to bring dollars back to the organization, and new revenue opportunities as well. Preston and I joked before the meeting here as we're going to show you a way today to maybe spend some money but save on taxes too and drive some savings. So there's a lot of dealers out there that own aircraft, and this is probably an opportune time to learn about that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Preston. Take it away, please.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Doug. I appreciate that kind intro. Yeah, as you know, Doug and I were talking about this webinar. It's ironic, right, that we're talking about saving a lot of money, and Doug and his team is going to help you save the money. I'm going to help you spend the money and be able to actually grow your business as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about private aviation, a little bit of background. First, we're going to start out with a poll. We'd love to find out kind of who you guys are, right? So want to know, who are you? What do you guys do? So there should be a poll that pops up for you right here. And we'll wait and let everybody answer here for a moment. A lot of our clients are principals of dealer principals and people who own some sort of business. Private aviation is oftentimes something that's a bit of a taboo subject, right? You don't want to talk about, hey, I went and flew on my private jet, but what we're going to talk about today is how you can actually grow your business through using private aviation. So if we want to show, we've got some dealer principals, some dealer management, outside vendors, really excited to have you guys here today with us. And we are, we'll go ahead and move forward. So I want to start out with, do you have an F&I office that looks something like this, right? Most car dealerships have some office that looks something like this, where you actually get the deal done and, you sign your name at the dotted line, and your salesperson is sitting outside of the office waiting because they know that, that transaction's about to happen. Unfortunately, aviation doesn't work like buying a vehicle. Buying an airplane is much more akin to a commercial line of credit or buying a home as opposed to buying a car, right? It's a full credit underwriting process. And the other thing is that oftentimes your bank doesn't necessarily understand your airplane, right? So what we provide is we use technology to actually match airplane buyers with lending sources across the country that actually like this asset class, right? So we help make sure that those two people get connected. We have a team of experts on our staff that are aviation people, right? We know the difference between different types of airplanes and can help you understand. And, usually we come in, somebody already has a make and model picked out. We're going to help them actually be able to close on that transaction and find a capital source that actually works for purchasing that asset. So that's a little bit about who we are. What we're going to learn today, we're going to talk about how multi-location dealers utilize private aviation, right? As you go between locations, maybe you have a location, I'm here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Maybe we have a location here and maybe a location, somewhere in South Georgia. Well, getting from Chattanooga to South Georgia is not easy to do on Delta. How do you get into it, right? What are the different types of options for private aviation? You don't have to own the entire airplane to actually utilize private aviation. We're talking about the current interest rate environment, and then when does and when, more importantly, doesn't it make sense for you to use private aviation, and some of the things that you need to be asking your finance team and things as you're looking at buying your next airplane. So, have you utilized business aviation in your business in the last 12 months? This is another poll question that we're going to throw up on the screen. And, one of the things that we find is for a lot of our customers is that buying an airplane is actually not the first time that they've used private aviation inside of their business. It's usually there is a few other ways to get into private aviation as opposed to owning the entire aircraft, right? You've got chartering options. It's funny. I write a newsletter every week to end consumers, and I'll be sure to include a link somewhere in here for that. But I ran a survey, and it was, I said, hey, do you own your own airplane? Do you charter? Do you own fractional? Which of the following do you use? And somebody put in other, and they typed in, they said, does having my friend come pick me up in their jet count? And it does count, right? You utilize private aviation. So it looks like we got about 40% of people here on the call that have used private aviation in their business in the last 12 months. For the 6 that haven't, I hope that by the end of this, you feel a little bit more comfortable as to what your options are, understand how it can actually make an impact to revenue, how it can make an impact to different parts of your business. So really excited to kind of dive in. If you have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat. We'd love to hear it. We'll get to a Q&A section at the end, but a lot of times, I know when I attend webinars, it's like, oh, I'm thinking about the question now. Well, I'm going to wait for the Q&A. Go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'll get to it at the end, but I don't want you to, lose the question and then think, what was I thinking about earlier? So go ahead and drop that in there. So we'd love to hear from you. So here's some facts about business aviation, right? So business aviation, private aviation are oftentimes used interchangeably, right? So we're specifically talking right now about using private aviation for your business, right? It minimizes travel time. It enables flexible schedules, increases productivity, ensures employee safety and security, enables the delivery of sensitive equipment, and it facilitates multi-stop itineraries in the same day. And that's a huge one, especially for multi-location businesses, right? So you think about, we were talking earlier about having a location in South Georgia and one in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Well, what happens if I have one in Memphis, Chattanooga, and South Georgia? If I'm going to fly commercially, getting between all 3 of those locations is going to take 5 to 6 business days to actually have any effect on the actual location. Whereas using private aviation, you could visit all 3 of those locations in one given day and then be back at home and have a fully productive day the next day, which is a huge thing. That's what a lot of our clients are actually seeing is, look, I'm going to go visit multiple locations. I'm going to go check in with my teams, see on the ground, and then I'm going to be back home for dinner or for a kid's sports game or something like that. So here's an interesting fact about business aviation. Business airplanes can reach about 5,000 airports. The airlines only reach 500. So you think about the last time that you got on an American or a Delta or United flight, you were at one of 500 airports in the US. There are actually 5,000 airports that are accessible via private aviation. Here's an interesting fact that I learned this week. There are more airports in the United States than there are Chipotle locations, right? So if you like eating Chipotle, I know I like eating Chipotle. There are more actual airports than there are Chipotles. So think about how many Chipotles there are near your house. There's more airports than that in the US. Here's talking about comparing people who use business aviation and who don't. What's the actual impact for their business when it comes to utilizing that private aviation? If you look at S&P companies, this information is from the National Business Aviation Association, which is our association, right? You guys have your dealer associations, your regional associations. We have one for business aviation. But S&P 500 companies outperform the businesses that don't use business aviation by 70%, right? So it's a huge increase in productivity. And business aircraft users outperform non-users by 23% in revenue growth. When you talk about driving revenue growth in your locations, actually having that in-person impact, we came out of the pandemic and Zoom has become a verb, right? Let's jump on a Zoom. But look, a lot of times there is something to be said about being in person and being able to say, look, I had eyes on the location. I had a face-to-face conversation with my management team at a local location. There's something to be said about that. And the data proves it, right? Business aviation users outperform non-users by 23%. Here's the other piece that I think that oftentimes gets misconstrued is that 86% of business aviation flights carry non-executives. So you think about, I'll give you an example, right? So State Farm has a corporate flight department. They are taking delivery of a few new aircraft at the end of this year, and they have a policy where no two executives can be on the same flight at any given time. It's a corporate policy for them. But 86% of business aviation flights actually don't include top executives. This includes sales engineers. This includes vice president of sales. This includes regional directors, regional managers, engineers, staff that actually manage your on-site locations. Using business aviation to move those individuals around increases productivity as well. And if you think about the lost productivity of those high paid individuals most of the time for having downtime of being at an airport, having to travel for 8 hours in both directions to spend 4 hours on the ground, think about the lost productivity that you have in your other locations. And all of a sudden it starts making sense to utilize your business aviation aircraft to move those individuals. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a big private jet. And that's what we're about to talk about. How many locations does your business currently have? If you're a dealer principal or if you're in management, I would love to know, look, if you have just one location, it's going to be very hard to really understand, the type of impact that this can make. But as soon as you get to two locations, especially if they're in disparate cities, right? I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida, right? So Crown is our big dealership group down there, and bought a few cars from Crown, and they've got a couple of locations there in St. Petersburg, Florida. They also have a location. I found it interesting when I moved up here to Chattanooga. They have a location here in Chattanooga, and I'll tell you this: to get from St. Petersburg to Chattanooga, because I've done it many times going back home, is about an 8-hour ordeal. The time distance between those two locations is really much greater because on Delta, look, we don't have very good direct service to St. Petersburg or Tampa. So you have to go Chattanooga to Atlanta, Atlanta to Tampa, get to Tampa, get into an Uber across the bay, and to get into those locations. So, as soon as you start looking at expanding regionally, business aviation starts to really make a big impact in your business. So it looks like about 50-50 between just one and multi-location. So I think that for those who own just one location, I think this is going to be helpful for you to understand. This is where we're going to get to when we start looking at expansion at a regional level or even at a national level, right? We're always thinking about growth. If you're anything like me, we're thinking about how are we going to grow our business? What's our next market opportunity? This hopefully will help give you a framework for when you're ready to take that next step that it'll help. So let's go over the different types of aircraft that there are. So one common misconception in private and business aviation is that, okay, I need to be like Elon Musk, right? So Elon Musk flies a Gulfstream G650ER, or Taylor Swift, who flies a Dassault Falcon Jet 7X, and I have to be on a 15-passenger heavy aircraft that can go from Miami to London nonstop, right? Oftentimes when we think private jet, that's immediately what we go to. Well, there's an entire world of business aviation that you can unlock that frankly doesn't cost nearly as much money to get into, and on a per hour basis starts to become your measurement of ROI becomes much different. So this is a turboprop aircraft. If you look on the left of your screen, this is a Pilatus PC-12. This is my personal favorite single engine turboprop on the market. There's a few that fly out of here in Chattanooga, and it's a beautiful airplane. It can seat up to 9 people. It can carry ski bags and golf bags, or parts for for a location or something like that. These are ideal for between 1 and 3 hours with between 2 and 9 passengers, right? So 9 passengers are going to be in your PC-12. Some other popular single engine turboprops are the TBM 960 and the Epic E1000 GX. King Airs. If you're familiar with King Airs, this is a very popular one. It's a multi-engine turboprop. It's got 2 engines on it, but it does have propellers on it. These are going to cost you between $500 and $1,200 an hour to operate, dependent upon which type of aircraft you select and how fast you're going and how much weight you're carrying. That number may vary, but compared to first class travel, when you start loading up 3, 4, 5, 6 executives or 6 top people in your company, all of a sudden it starts to become fairly comparable, right? If you can save a hotel room for 4 or 5 of people in your group, and maybe you have a rural location, and so United is going to charge you an arm and a leg. All of a sudden, the cost metrics on a turboprop, they're incredibly cost effective. You're going to purchase them between $1 and $8 million. We're gonna get into kind of the purchasing process later, but just to give you an idea as to what you can kind of get into, this is call it the entry level, but there's a lot of people who this is the only aircraft they ever own is a turboprop. This is the range of a turboprop. So this is based out of New York City to give you an idea of how far can you get. You can do New York City to Miami nonstop. You go down the coast. But it's really, again, good for those between 1 and 3 hour trips. They're not as fast as jets, right? So when you're talking about moving through the air, they're not going to move as fast, but they are incredibly efficient, cost efficient, effective, and really popular in that, call it 2 to 5 location model, especially regionally, right? So if you have 4 or 5 locations in California scattered across, the turboprop is a great option for you. You can also get into really short runways, which means that you can get closer to your location. So you think about the last time that you flew in commercially and maybe you had to drive 30 minutes or 45 minutes to get your location. Again, there's 5,000 airports the business aviation aircraft can get into. Chances are you can get closer. These are light jets. So light jets is kind of the next step up out of the turboprop market. So these are great for 3 to 8 passengers. You can fly as little as 1, obviously. These are great for on-site visits, board meetings, executive travel. Your purchase price can be between $2 million and $15 million. It's going to cost you $1,000 to $2,500 per hour. So everything in aviation, when I talk about per hour, this is one question that I often get is, okay, so why per hour? Why is that the measurement? Why is it not per mile or per distance? But a lot of that has to do with fuel burn. We measure all the fuel burn by hour. We measure engine programs, which is, think health savings account meets insurance on a per hour basis. Most of the consumables in private aviation are measured on a per hour basis. So that's why we use per hour when we talk about the cost per hour. So they're going to cost you about $1,000 to $2,500 per hour. Purchase price of $2 to $15 million. Cessna CJ4, which is the picture that you see on the right, is a very popular model. The Phenom 300, the Honda Jet. There's a wide variety of light jets. The Vision Jet is a fantastic option. Doug and I were talking before this that they had a booth at a trade show next to Cirrus. The Cirrus Vision Jet is a great example of that. And these are oftentimes, you can still fly these as an owner-flown pilot, but this is when we really start looking into having a corporate flight department, a professional pilot that you're hiring either on a one-off basis or having on full-time staff. Here's the range of, this is a CJ4 range, right? So we stretch out the range a little bit further than that of the PC-12 or the Epic E1000. These all, for the most part, are going to have a bathroom on board, so you can stretch your distances a little bit further. Oftentimes, with light jets, you're not going to be able to stand up all the way, right? So this is not a stand-up cabin, but it is comfortable for 4 to 6 executives, depending on the model that you choose. Mid-size jets. These are great for longer trips. These aircraft most times can make it coast to coast in some way, shape, or form. Now, the most popular trip in private aviation is New York City, Teterboro to LAX, or somewhere in Los Angeles. The mid-size jet, you're going to really need to step up into what's called a super mid-size jet, and that's something that I think is very ironic, right? We have light jets, mid-size jets, and then super mid-size jets. They said, we don't really want to call it something different, so we just said, let's add a super in front of it. So these are going to be Gulfstream G280, Challenger 350 or 3500, Learjet 45. They're going to cost $1,000 to $2,500 per hour on a consumable basis. And these are designed for the ultimate operator. These are people who are really needing to move fast, a lot of equipment or a lot of people, and they really want to get somewhere as fast and efficient as possible. Here's the range of a popular mid-sized jet, the Challenger 300. So as you can see, it can get coast to coast. Can you make it to Europe? Yes, you can, but you're really going to have to stop for fuel somewhere on the outer edge of Europe if you want to take the trip across the pond. It's also, frankly, a little small to be traveling that far. And on a cost comparison basis, oftentimes Delta One, the lay flat seats is pretty solid. One other note that I want to make note of is we talk about cost per hour is there is also a significant amount of fixed costs associated with private aviation. These are things that are, regardless of whether you fly it for 0 hours a year or you fly it for 400 hours a year, you're going to pay regardless. This is hangar fees, this is insurance, this is equipment and different programs that you have to use in order to manage the airplane. This is aircraft management, right? So whether you have a full-time flight department internally that are on staff and employees, or you can outsource that similar to property management where they provide the pilots and maintenance and all of that kind of stuff. These are all things that are going to be fixed costs, and they're going to range anywhere from, $80,000 a year on the low end, and they're going to go, if you start talking about flying a heavy jet, a G650, you're going to be paying $1 million a year for some of those heavier jets. But, as we kind of live in that mid-range, it's going to be, expect $80,000 to $250,000, $300,000 per year. And then if you want to actually employ full-time pilots, add a little bit on top of that, kind of in that turboprop range through mid-sized jet range, and it can push up into 500,000. It just kind of depends. We're not going to get all the way up into, call it $1 million to manage a smaller airplane like that. But I just wanted to make a note that as we talk about per hour, there is this concept of effective rate per hour, where if you are flying 30 hours a year, oftentimes the whole aircraft ownership, it's a tough justification to make. And this is where and this is actually where fractional ownership comes in. So you can buy as little as 1/16 of the airplane. These programs are offered through a variety of companies. The big ones that you've probably heard of are NetJets, Volato, AirShare, Nicholas Air, FlexJet. Have you ever heard somebody say when you're playing golf, "Oh yeah, my NetJets share"? What it means is they've actually purchased a portion of the aircraft. What that gives them is a certain percentage of access to the airplane in that given year, right? So you can buy as little as 1/16, which is usually equates to about 20 days of access to the airplane. And then you pay a relatively low cost of operation for that. You share those fixed expenses, right? So to give you, to give you an idea, a 1/16 on a Phenom 300 from a popular operator, the buy-in cost is going to be $600,000 up front, which purchases 1/16 of the airplane. You're able to there's actually a terminal value at the end of the 5-year contract that you actually sell back to the operator. Expect about a 7% depreciation year over year on that initial purchase, $600,000 up front. You're going to pay around $4,200 per hour when you fly it, and then $11,000 per month on a monthly shared expense basis. What that gives you is it gives you 20 days a year to be able to fly, and you can fly as many hours in those 20 days as you want to. This is great if you have quarterly or monthly trips planned to visit all of your locations. Jump in the airplane, you make an express round trip to go see all of your locations in one day. You're back home. Maybe we're going to do the same thing in a month, right? So it's a great option for those people who don't really want all of that fixed cost overhead. Fractional aircraft ownership usually makes sense when you start flying 50 hours a year, but it starts to make more sense to own once you cross flying 150 hours a year up into the 200 hours a year range. So that's kind of when owning the aircraft makes a little bit more sense. You can buy 1/16 up to about 3/4. You can legally only buy 80% of the airplane in one of these programs, but they have what's called a floating fleet. So I'm here in Chattanooga, and let's say there is a airplane over in Nashville dropping off a customer. That airplane's going to come over, fly over here, pick me up, and go to my next destination. So their fleets float, which means that you don't have to pay costly relocation fees or anything like that in these fractional programs. So NetJets, Volato operates Honda jets, which I think is great for regional operators. And they primarily operate in the Sun Belt as well as in California. Bonus depreciation. Here is my legal counsel made sure that I include the following. Following information is anecdotal information and should not be taken as tax advice. Please consult your CPA or an aviation-specific CPA before making any decisions. So now that we have that taken care of, we're going to talk about how does bonus depreciation work. and how does it work within aircraft? Because all of a sudden, when maybe you call your CFO and you say, hey, it's time to ready to buy a new airplane, right? They're going to start thinking about, okay, how do we maximize the benefits from a tax perspective and actually reduce our taxable income at the end of the year by buying this airplane? And you can actually bonus depreciate a lot of that if you buy a truck or if you buy another piece of equipment. It operates very similarly. This year, you can bonus depreciate 60% of your purchase. And this is inclusive of pre-owned and new aircraft. There is a misconception out there that you have to buy a new airplane to be able to bonus depreciate it. That's not the case. You can actually bonus depreciate pre-owned aircraft. It must be 51% business use. That's a very important piece of information, is that you do have to use the airplane for 51% business in order to write it off into your business. Anything lower than that can start to get you into hot water. If you're in need of a good aviation tax consultant, it's a really easy URL. aviationtaxconsultants.com. Daniel Chung, the principal over there, is a good friend of mine, and he will help you make sure that you are doing everything by the book from a tax standpoint so that you can actually take advantage of that bonus depreciation. It could increase to 100% if the Senate passes the bill that is sitting in the chamber. We're hoping that it happens sometime this week or next week, because there's a retroactive piece in there that goes into last year. But that would allow you to bonus depreciate 100% of the purchase price in year one. This actually lowers your tax burden in the year that you purchase the airplane. And now this is back of the napkin math, and I will say that not every situation ends up working out like this, but oftentimes what we see for our clients is that bonus depreciation, that reduction in tax burden, actually covers the deposit on the airplane, or the 20% down payment that oftentimes happens in aircraft terms. So that actual tax savings, you basically, at the end of the day, it's, you're lowering your tax burden, and you are going to have to write a check, but that reduction in tax burden actually ends up covering a lot of those costs. So depending on what tax bracket you're in and how your structure works, this works very differently for different types of businesses. So be sure to, consult your CPA. The other piece that I will point out when you're talking about bonus depreciating an airplane is you want to make sure that you are in compliance with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Association, and some of their rules around chartering and registrations. And you really want to make sure that you're taking care of that on the front end, because if you register it to the wrong entity, or maybe there's an interesting kind of in-kind thing that's going on in the background, you can get in trouble. So be sure to do more work on the front end, assemble a team that's actually going to help you purchase this. Look, here's the deal. If you're anything like me, you don't have much more time during the day to start thinking about something like this, which is why you really want to bring in a team of experts that this is what they do all day, because now you don't have to think about it. And you make sure that you're taken care of, right? Setting up a airplane LLC that then leases back to the parent company and all that different kind of stuff. You don't really want to be thinking about that. Let's be honest, right? You probably have higher and better use of your time. So be sure to bring a team in around you that's going to help you make that decision and make sure that you stay safe in some of that situation. That kind of brings me to the point that I talked about earlier. When you go to buy an airplane, your bank probably does not understand your airplane. If you call your banker, right? Let's say you bank with a nice regional bank and you say, hey, Mr. Banker, I know that I do millions of dollars of throughput in your bank, and I'd like to buy an airplane. They're going to likely come back to you and say, well, we don't really know anything about your airplane, so we'll underwrite you for who you are in our relationship, but we really don't know anything about that asset class. That's where we are able to provide a lot of value in transactions, is that we understand the airplane. We understand what is a good term versus what is a bad term, right? I'll give you an anecdotal evidence. I have a friend who's in commercial real estate in Texas, and he gave me a call the other day and said, hey, I bought an airplane. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, do you finance it? He said, yeah, I financed it. I said, oh, cool. That's the business that I'm in, right? He's like, I know. But, my banker said, that it's all good. They're going to take care of me. I said, great. What's your term? And basically he missed out on 5 years amortization. He missed out on 10 extra percentage points of deposit that he had to put. His term balloon payment was a 5-year term, and he was paying 7.75% interest. I will just go ahead and tell you right now, we're going to talk about this later, but that is a really expensive airplane loan. And it also had a 3% penalty in the first year as a 321 penalty, which was even more painful. And I said, man, I wish you would have at least shot me a text and said, hey, here's the offer I got. Because I could have at least told you, hey, market says that you should at least get a 15, 20-year amortization on that airplane. So that's where we step in. That's where we provide a lot of value in the transaction is we understand your airplane and we understand what your needs are. And we also understand what the marketplace is, right? Not every bank will actually loan on airplanes, but there are banks that do have an appetite for this type of loan in their portfolio, right? And frankly, they are very disparate and they're often very small and you probably can't find them on Google. So here's our process. Look, you apply online. We have an online application. You submit your documents. It's a commercial credit underwriting process, and then we fund you. Typically, we can get it done in as little as 7 days, depending on how tight your corporate finance department is. Your traditional bank's going to be 30 plus days. Another anecdotal, I had another friend closing on an airplane, and he said, "Hey, I was going to finance it with you, but my bank, gave me these really great terms, and frankly, non-recourse debt and all this good kind of stuff." I said, "Look, no worries." I said, "Go with your bank. It's awesome. Glad that you got a good option." He needed to close by the end of the year because in order to capture that bonus depreciation last year, he needed to close by December 31st. He called me on December 18th and said, my bank just told me they probably can't close on this. Why? Because the bank doesn't understand the asset. They don't understand what documents they're going to need to actually be able to get that loan closed and get that loan funded. That's where we step in. We're the advocate on your behalf to the bank. If there's a hard conversation that needs to happen with the bank to make a process go faster, we're going to step in and make sure that that's happening on your behalf. So what makes us different? We have competitive rates, right? We actually go to market and we shop the deal to a variety of banks. We have about 100 banks on our platform across the country that we'll go shop this loan to. We can get you a longer amortization because we understand the airplane and we understand which banks will amortize your airplane longer. Again, we understand the airplane. We work directly with your finance team. I love being in contact with CFOs because frankly, you as the principal, you are a visionary and fantastic. 80% of the time, the visionary does not have a full, clean credit underwriting package ready to go. The CFO, that's usually an easy conversation. So we work directly with your finance team and we help optimize your cost of ownership based off of what your financial goals are in your company. So we really try and help that. So I appreciate your time. I think I just landed 30 seconds after the time that I was trying to land on. So time management. This is my contact information, Preston at flyingfinance.com. That's my phone number right there. You can call or text me on that if you have any questions. And look, I have conversations with people all the time that are not buying airplanes, but they're using private aviation. Call me. I'm happy to help coach you through what's the right first step, how do you pick the right aircraft for your mission, things like that. Please feel free to reach out anytime. And Doug, thanks so much for having me today. And I think we probably have some questions. So.
All right. Thank you, Preston. And everyone, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that for asking a question of Preston. And we'll cover as many as we can before Doug comes back on. So here is one. Let me read this one. What are standard bank terms in today's market?
Yeah, so when I'm having conversations with people, one of the things that you want to take into consideration is how old of an airplane are you looking at? The older that you go, the shorter the amortization rates tend to be. But when I tell people, hey, if you're doing back of the napkin math and you're saying, okay, generally what should I underwrite to? This is what I tell people is 25% down on the aircraft. You're looking at a 15-year amortization and around an 8% interest rate. Now, we can get as low as 7%. It can get as high as 9.5%, depending on the age of the airplane and creditworthiness and a couple of those different kind of, factors. And the amortization length, it may get shorter, it may get down to 10 years, or it may get as long as 20. But if you're going to do a conservative underwriting, that's the conservative way to underwrite it. And then we're going to come in and we're going to say, look, we're going to go to market and find better terms for that based off of what your particular goals are.
And here is another Do I have to use the airplane for only business purposes?
So you don't have to use it for only business purposes. You can use it for personal time on the airplane. We talked earlier about bonus depreciation and the 51%. If you're really trying to save and maximize your tax spend, you do need to use the airplane for 51% business. The other 49%, again, consult an aviation tax attorney to make sure that your exact situation matches this. But the short answer on that is no, you don't have to only use it for business purposes.
Again, reminding everyone that you can click on the Q&A button to enter a question here for Preston. Here's another. What type of aircraft do you see for different size dealerships?
Yeah, so good question. So we had talked earlier, we see a lot of single engine turboprops for that 2 to 4 location type dealerships, especially regionally. They're great because they're cost efficient, they're fuel efficient. Oftentimes, as far as, when you think about contribution margin of those individual locations, right? You don't have this giant, excess of cash. And so the turboprop is a really great entry level market. It's usually somewhere turboprop to mid-sized jet. The mid-sized jet is usually, they call it 10 to 15 location dealerships. We see, those that have more of a national presence are flying in those. And then, when we've seen even as high as somebody buying a large cabin jet, but that's mostly, that's oftentimes more about the 49% that they're using it, less about the 51%.
And here's another. How does a person decide which kind of aircraft is best for them?
So the most important piece about selecting your aircraft is identifying your mission, right? So when I say identifying your mission, it's what trips am I flying 80% of the time? So if you think about that trip from St. Petersburg to Chattanooga that we were talking about earlier, and that is 80% of your activity is going from St. Petersburg to Chattanooga, and it's oftentimes taking 2 to 3 people. Now we can start narrowing down, look, you don't necessarily need a mid-sized jet unless you just want one, right? And personal preference is a huge piece of it. Is I like the look, I like the feel, I like the size, I like to be able to stand up straight. But once you identify that mission, then you can start selecting the airplane for what fits your actual mission profile. The other 20% of the time, frankly, on a cost basis, if you have 20% of trips, let's say, 20% of the time you want to go from St. Petersburg to San Francisco, whether it's for personal or for business, what have you. Oftentimes it makes more sense financially to charter those trips for the 20% and then own the airplane that flies 80% of your trips. So you really want to identify that mission. And then once you identify that mission and establish your budget, then you can start shopping for airplanes. But it really doesn't make sense to say, hey, I really don't know what airplane that I want, and then go to market and say, yeah, I got a few $1,000,000, want to, buy an airplane. You can buy an ultra long range jet for the same price, but it may not be efficient. It may not be as comfortable. It may not be, it may have some maintenance issues than what you would buy something smaller and newer. So you really want to identify your mission and then select that one for which aircraft you actually purchase.
I don't see any additional questions from our group. So Doug, can you activate your webcam?
Oh, well, Preston, you did an outstanding job. Just as a reminder, everybody, we will have the recording up on this session on our website tomorrow. And again, if you're interested in a copy of this presentation, which I think is great, take a snapshot of this QR code and we'll get that information over to you. Preston, thanks so much for your time and all the work you put into this. Was really interesting and beneficial.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Doug.
All right. So we're going to kind of jump into strategic source a little bit. For those of you who may not be clients of us today, the question is, how much money are you leaving on the table? We just came back from NADA the other day, and I have never seen so much traffic at our booth. I think the dealers across the country are feeling the profit pinch right now. And what we know is that dealers tend to overspend by 25% on their supplies and services each month. And that's been pretty consistent with a couple of minor fluctuations over the years. Go ahead, David. Here's some facts that dealers should know. If you're interested in scope, dealers spend money, supplies and services in roughly 150 categories. They're typically spending in about 100. If you look at your total top line sales, if you're a $100 million dealership, you'll spend $5 million or 5% on supplies and services. And of that opportunity or of that spend, you're probably overpaying by 25%. Now, why is that? Well, it really speaks to the bottom bullet. 95% of dealerships don't have a structured purchasing department that is managing those 100 categories and all that spend. They're doing it on an ad hoc basis. And what happens if you look at the third bullet from the bottom, the supplier ratios tend to get out of whack, and it drives a lot of inefficiency into the dealerships. Go ahead, David. So the business problem, broad scope of categories, kind of a tactical firefighting approach. Dealers are short-staffed, and there's oftentimes not a plan to attack those categories. This is just a slide that kind of repeats that. But what it also says is, when the supply base gets extra big, too large, then we get too many supplier invoices, and then we're missing out on discounts and rebates as well. So we're wasting a lot of money in the process. This just shows, again, different ranges of revenue, the spend you're going to have, the opportunity. There's a group out there called the Aberdeen Group that says that groups without purchasing departments will overspend by 25%. The lowest we've ever seen, and we'll do 2,300 sourcing projects a year. The lowest we ever saw was in 2009. We were at 21%. We came off that big problem with the economy, and dealers got highly focused on their expenses again, meaning they were doing a better job, and we weren't finding it as much. So we were at 21%. We've seen it now reach as high as 27% in the past couple of years, which tells us dealers are taking their eye off the ball. So if you look at the opportunities there at 312, 625, and you look at that on a monthly basis, some pretty significant savings, new profits that we can bring to the bottom line. Again, the category scope is large. Here's 72 categories that every business will use. They'll spend money on, regardless of whether you're a dealer or a manufacturer or even a church, nonprofit, or a services company. Next slide. If you have a facility, you're going to probably spend money in these 15 categories. As automotive dealers, you're going to spend money in these 56 categories, plus there are other opportunities. So the scope is broad, and the question you ought to ask yourself is, are you paying attention to all those expense categories and maximizing your opportunity? So some of the solutions that we have, and then I'll jump off here. We have a profit improvement program that deals with the expenses that you have. We really provide a full service in this realm. Client benefits, we guarantee an ROI, reduced expenses, improved profitability. The next solution we have is we can do just a spend analysis in your organization. If you think you have the horsepower to take on all the categories, we can pull the data, code the data, and show you what the opportunities are in a descending engagement or descending report, so that you can build a plan. The benefits of this, again, you have a prioritized plan. This is a staff planning tool, and again, you can target cost reductions of about 25%. We have a contract tracker. If most dealers have contracts with suppliers, I know you try to minimize those, but I know that you have them. We have a tool that will help you manage that, provide alerts so that we don't get into auto renewals and situations like that, which right now, with prices rising, are kind of problematic. We have a spend management suite where we can combine some of the lower cost products to kind of coach and counsel. Our contract tracker, expense edge, spend management, coaching and learning. So we can guide your team. If you have the staff but you don't have the expertise, we can help you with that too. And finally, Expense Edge. We are building a pretty large database of all of our pricing for supplies and services. And if you feel that you have the horsepower to quote or renegotiate, but you want to know what the going rate is, what is the range out there, need some benchmarks, we can provide those. And then finally, spend management learning. We can teach you to do what we do. We've got 3 modules. We've got tools and white papers and webinars that we provide, so we can help you there too. So if you're interested in a copy of this deck, I'd encourage you to scan this QR code, reach out to us, we'll get it to you. If there's any questions that we can answer for you, we're happy to do that. And really appreciate your attendance today. We try to offer these every 2 weeks on different topics. Again, expense, audit recovery, revenue, and ideas like this too. Tax saving, time saving solutions. So Preston, thank you again. David, thank you. Have a great week, everybody.
And thank you, Doug. Thank you, Preston. And everyone, I'm going to bring up the post-session survey now. We'd love to get your feedback on the time spent. Getting this 2-question feedback, we review it, and it just makes us better as we plan future webinars. So thanks, everyone, for attending today, and we look forward to you joining us on future profit improvement webinar series events with Strategic Source. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. We look forward to you joining us next time.